Hello and welcome to covidiosyncrasy. My aim in these videos is to take something out of the panic out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this video asks whether there was carnage in Sweden. Among European countries in the spring of 2020, Sweden famously stood apart because of the moderation of the measures taken in response to COVID-19. So how did they get on compared to the rest of us? First, some basic facts about Sweden. It covers an area more than 1.5 times the size of the UK, but holds less than 1/6 of the population. Most of this population of just over 10 million live in cities in the south of the country, with almost a quarter living in the metropolitan area of the capital city, Stockholm. And a key player in this drama, which unfolded this year, is Anders Tegnell, the state epidemiologist since 2013. Tegnell was responsible for the decision not to impose lockdown on Sweden in the way that happened with many other European countries. As this chart of the stringency of government responses shows, Sweden's restrictions remained far more modest than those of other Nordic countries. And I've put the UK in there too for comparison. This is how Sweden's stringency index score of 46 was calculated. Notice that Sweden never implemented a general stay-at-home order for its population, and neither did it close primary schools or kindergartens, though it did recommend distance learning for secondary schools and universities. Generally, the Swedish measures took the form of advice rather than outright bans, the exception being a ban on gatherings of more than 500 people, which was later extended to gatherings of more than 50 people. This relatively light touch approach was the subject of much criticism in some quarters, including some voices from within Sweden. For example, in April, an academic paper was published which urged an immediate and radical policy U-turn. Drawing on the same modelling approach used by the group from Imperial College London, which had forecast as many as 500,000 deaths in the UK, this group too urged that disaster lay ahead if Tegnell and the government persisted with moderate mitigation rather than out-and-out disease suppression through universal social distancing. This is the paper's message in a nutshell. Notice the blue line in particular, which is labelled current recommendations. That refers to Tegnell's existing softly approach. Depending on the assumed doubling rate of the outbreak, the model forecast anything between around 80,000 and 95,000 deaths by the 1st of July. On this basis, they warned that the total death toll might exceed that exacted by the notorious Spanish flu of 1918, even allowing for population growth. 80,000 deaths at a minimum. That's sobering stuff. But regardless of warnings like these, Tegnell and the Swedish government, unlike their British counterparts, persevered with Plan A. So how bad did it get? What is the state of play as I write this at the end of August 2020? Well, this is from the Worldometer website, hot off the press. More than 80,000 recorded cases, sure, but happily fewer than 6,000 deaths. That's quite a big difference, isn't it? As in the case of the UK and the USA, the Imperial College model's results are an order of magnitude out. But you might say, for a country the size of Sweden, 6,000 remains a pretty big number, doesn't it? And in a way, you'd be right. This is the rather gruesome league table of COVID-19 related deaths per million of the population as of the end of August. If we omit Andorra and San Marino on account of their size, that means that Sweden is left 7th in the table. Better than some other European countries, including the UK, but still not great. And in particular, Sweden doesn't seem to compare well with its Nordic neighbours, if you look at population fatality ratios, which means they must have got things wrong, doesn't it? Well, that depends on how you look at things. Comparing COVID-19 related fatalities between countries can be hazardous because recording protocols can differ widely across jurisdictions. An alternative approach is to look at total deaths and to see what kind of picture emerges. This striking graph, which is courtesy of In Proportion To, shows cumulative all-cause mortality per million population for the Nordic countries, plus also Scotland, out of interest. The clock has been set to 0 at the start of week 49, 2019. And as you can see, as the weeks tick by, the lines diverge. In Norway, for some reason, people are dying at a slower rate than anywhere else, whereas in Scotland, it's quite the opposite. But notice what happens after around week 14, 2020. That is when COVID-related deaths begin to register. There's a noticeable kink in the Scottish and Swedish fatality rates. But while Scotland disappears into the stratosphere, Sweden stays roughly on a par with Denmark and Finland. Not so different to its Nordic neighbours after all then. Another perspective is given by looking at all-cause per capita mortality in Sweden over time. I've organised the data here so that each year runs from July to June in order to better capture the effects of winter flu seasons. Immediately, you can see how the all-cause mortality for this last year, ending week 26 or June 2020, is well below the average for the last 20 years. In fact, it's only about 1% above the average for the previous 5 years, and actually lower than the figures for both 2014-15 and 2016-17. What's striking is how low the mortality was last year, that's to say 2018-19. As in a number of other countries, including the UK, the last couple of flu seasons have been very mild. That implies that there was a significant tranche of frail, older people still around in spring 2020 who might well have otherwise already passed away. Now, these became a large, significant number of the COVID deaths. But had it not been for the mild preceding flu seasons, these wouldn't have registered as such, and Sweden's superficial COVID-19 statistics would have looked rather different. After all, we know that in Europe, some 3/4 of COVID deaths are of those over 75 years old, and you can only die once. You may also have heard that a disproportionate number of COVID-19 related fatalities in Sweden took place in care homes, and that the government was negligent there. But according to data from the International Long-Term Care Policy Network, the relative position of Sweden doesn't look so bad, with 47% of COVID-19 related deaths occurring in care home settings. As you can see here, that's pretty average for comparable countries. All told, some 2.8% of those living in Swedish care homes died with, if not from, COVID-19 during the spring of 2020. And this compares, for example, with 4.9% in Belgium, 5.3% in the UK, and 6.1% in Spain. So, carnage in Sweden? Not quite. Thanks to Anders Tegnell, we know that you don't need to shut down society for weeks on end in order to survive COVID-19. This is incredibly important for those of us who care about the loss of basic personal freedoms and the devastation of our economy. Sweden shows that there is another way. And as the UK continues to cower under the threat of future local, if not national lockdowns, that's well worth remembering. This has been Covidiosyncrasy. Thanks for watching.